Good morning. I'm Esther Manheimer, the Mayor of the City of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to the June 20th, 2024 Agenda Briefing Work Session. All council members and staff are participating virtually. The live meeting will be streamed on the city's YouTube channel, accessed through the YouTube icon on the front page of the city's website or via the live stream. The live meeting will be available on Charter Spectrum Channel 193. You may listen to the meeting via phone at 855-925-2801, meeting code 7060. And as per usual, we will not take public comment during the agenda review work session. Council and staff, please unmute yourselves and say a quick hello when I call your name. Vice Mayor Sandra Kilgore.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hey, everybody.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good morning.
Our Deputy City Attorney John Maddox. Our City Clerk Maggie Burleson.
Good morning.
And Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley will not be able to join us today. And before I turn it over to the City Manager, I just wanted to make a remark about an incident that happened in the last couple of days. The City of Asheville has a volunteer committee task force that was self-appointed through the Chamber of Commerce. It's a task force that has been working for the last several months on helping create a business improvement district and bringing forward recommendations to the City Council. And as you all know, the bid was adopted at our last City Council meeting. And at that time, I spoke about the vandalism that was inflicted upon one of those task force members' vehicles, slashing their tires and spray painting their car. And unfortunately, a second task member's car has now been vandalized with their tires slashed and their car spray painted. And both of these incidents happened right in front of their homes. And of course, the remaining task force members are quite concerned. And I know we all condemn this kind of behavior in our community, this kind of intimidation towards folks that are simply volunteering their time to work on an effort that they believe will be better for our community, that I agree will be better for our community. And I just hate to see the conversation in our community go beyond civil conversation and to violence and intimidation perpetrated against folks. It is not okay to silence people through intimidation in this way. And I'll say this again at our council meeting on Tuesday, because I know not that many people watch our agenda reviews, but I just felt like it was necessary to say something about this incident that happened this week. Now I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Campbell, our City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning again, and welcome to our council agenda briefing meeting. As you know, these meetings are designed to brief you, Mayor, and council about items that are scheduled for your upcoming meeting. And the upcoming meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, June 25th. We also have these meetings to share items that may be as long as 8 weeks that are coming to your agenda. At our last meeting, the consent agenda was very long. That is not going to be the case for the upcoming meeting. But as far as this meeting is concerned, I believe that we will spend the majority of our time on the part of this agenda briefing session on other issues and updates. I understand that there are a number of issues that are not actually scheduled on the agenda that you all may want to discuss. And we want to leave enough time to have some of that discussion. Rachel Wood will be reviewing the agenda. So I'm going to turn it over to her. And again, thank you, Mayor, for those words. Appreciate it. Civil discourse is what democracy is about, and I hope that we can do better. Thanks.
Thank you, Deborah, and good morning again, Mayor and Council. Starting off with the June 25th agenda, we do have a work session that will begin at 3 o'clock in the council chambers. And the topic of that work session is an update on the completion of the affordable housing plan. This will include providing recommendations on the Housing Trust Fund, the Land Use Incentive Grant Program, and ways to maximize the impact of the proposed 2024 affordable housing bond. The presentation will also seek feedback on the draft implementation plan for the plan's first 3 years. After the work session, moving on to your formal meeting, which will begin at 5 o'clock, we do have one proclamation scheduled, and that will be proclaiming July 2024 as Parks and Recreation Month. This will be recognizing the great work that our Parks and Recreation team does in our community year-round. Going into the consent agenda, as Deborah mentioned, we do have a robust consent agenda. I'm going to skip over a few items and just highlight a few that staff viewed as particularly noteworthy, but as is our typical process, if you have questions on items that I skip over, please let me know and we'd be happy to go through those in greater detail. The first item I'm going to highlight is item C. Item C includes a resolution and budget amendment to appropriate $811,808 in opioid settlement funds to cover the cost of 2 support specialist positions for our community responder program for a period of 3 years. This $811,000 represents the total we will have received from the opioid settlement by the end of FY 2025. And the 2 support specialists will provide recovery support services to help people access addiction treatment, recovery support, harm reduction services, primary health care, and other services needed to improve health and well-being. Moving on to item E. Item E is a procedural step required for the 2024 November bond referendum. This requested council action on Tuesday sets the bond order and sets the public hearing for the bond order. The public hearing is scheduled for July 23rd, where the council will adopt a resolution setting the bond referendum. And then the next procedural step after July 23rd is the actual bond referendum in November. Moving down to item H. Item H is our last amendment under our current contract for RATP Dev for transit operations in FY 2025. This amendment totals $11.2 million to support existing transit services. And as I mentioned, this is the last amendment allowed under our current contract. So one of the major tasks for the Transit Division and Transportation Department over the course of the next year, we'll be finalizing the RFP and entering into a new contract for the provision of transit services. It's important to note that the cost of providing those services will likely go up substantially, but we will not know until probably spring of 2025 how much those operational costs will increase. And so just wanted to make sure council was aware of that. This is our last year of our current contract with RATP Dev. We're going to need to enter into a new operations and maintenance contract at the start of FY 2026. And we don't know how expensive it will be, but as is the case with most of our contracted services, the cost of those services will most likely go up substantially with FY 2026. And I see we have a hand from Councilmember Roney.
Thank you, Rachel. I know there's a lot of information about transit that's floating around right now. So I just wanted to ask if you can confirm for me. When I read through the documents, it was really helpful to see what some of the previous amendments had been about, but it wasn't as clear to me what this one is about other than just increased costs. We know that providing public services like water, for example, has increased costs and transit's going to have increased costs, but was it related to wages? Is it just the routes? Is it a combination? That part wasn't clear. But then also, can you confirm that this is already budgeted? It's not new funds that need to be identified.
This is already budgeted, and I do have Paul and Jessica on here if more specific details are needed, but the primary drivers of this amendment are the increased wages for drivers and then those routes that were added during the pandemic.
Will there be other documents attached to our agenda tomorrow about any details around that?
Hey, Jessica.
Councilwoman Roney, this is just the increased cost for existing base services and is really just related to inflationary costs and cost of fuel and all of those things. So there is nothing additional, but it does include the drivers and the staff's normal wage increases that they receive under their collective bargaining agreement. But that's all it is.
Okay. Normally something like this could have gone to the transit committee that was on Tuesday, and I imagine we could have gotten into the weeds a little bit more. So since it wasn't on that agenda, it'll just be helpful. Any documentation that we have in a planned staff report, I'll definitely review and look for more information.
Maybe I'm not totally understanding what this is, but is this, we've approved the budget, right? And so you're just implementing the increases that we just adopted.
Correct.
This isn't, right? I mean, this isn't, we're not changing a scope of work. We're just, it's a technical matter that you have to have this action on the consent agenda in order to implement the budget we just adopted per the transit fund, right?
Correct.
Is that clear? I mean, I just want to make sure,
Yeah.
like, that wouldn't normally go to the transit committee, Kim, would it? I mean, something that we're just, this is like the second step now that the budget's been adopted, right? So that these drivers can get the increase in pay and so on and so forth.
This is the final year of our 8-year contract, and it's just the normal, no service increases, nothing is changing. Same for the paratransit contract that's also on this agenda. Just getting us ready to be able to expend funds for those services in fiscal year 25.
It used to be common that there was a budget conversation at the transit committee level, and really basic conversations like this would happen and questions would be asked, and instead of them coming to me, they would go to the transit committee and we would get into the weeds, and then by the time we get to this conversation there wouldn't be even questions about this. We just are missing that part of the advisory committee engagement, and so that's why I'm getting questions about it.
Okay, moving to item J. Item J involves authorization to execute a construction and maintenance agreement with NCDOT for the Haywood Road resurfacing and pedestrian improvement project. This project spans roughly 1.9 miles of Haywood Road between Patton Avenue and Ridgelawn Road, which is also referred to as Beecham's Curve. The project is funded primarily by NCDOT and requires no city funds, with the exception of $21,750 for the cost of parking restriping and the installation of about 125 cast iron truncated domes, which are also referred to as tactile paving. Those are the plates that are put for ADA purposes on ramps, and they are required for ADA purposes. You have received 2 memos related to the project with additional details on the work that city staff has done in partnership with community groups, as well as with NCDOT, to advocate for additional pedestrian and bicycle facilities in the project. And again, we do have Jessica Morris here if there are specific questions on those improvements or the work that staff has done. Councilmember Roney.
I did also send some notes from conversations with DOT as well as the West Asheville Business Association. I just received the East West Asheville Neighborhood Association list of improvements, and we have been getting input from Strong Towns Asheville about this. So I'm going to send the East West Asheville Neighborhood Association list along, since that's new information, but we should also expect to get asks, especially because there was just this week another incident at Haywood Road crossing at a crosswalk. So I'll send that information later today.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to cover items K.
Can I just ask? Sure. So can I just ask procedurally? So that's on our consent agenda to enter into the agreement. Process-wise, I know you all sent a 4-page long memo about this, but I mean, what will the council be weighing in on design should the council be weighing in on design? When would the council be weighing in on design? Like, how does this work in terms of we have this on the consent agenda, we approve it, then what happens? Because we want to be able to, bring the input we're getting from the community and from Strong Towns and others with, design ideas. Tell us about how that would work.
Also, my understanding was that the DOT is letting this for bid in the fall for 2025 spring implementation at the soonest. There's not going to be public engagement again around this. It was my understanding from DOT staff, but it would indeed be helpful to know where the council weighs in.
Jessica.
I'll do my best to answer. So this is an NCDOT project, and as far as I've been informed, they feel as though the community engagement aspect of the project has been completed. So our staff has been working diligently with them for the last several years on the project, and which has resulted in what I think are some very positive pedestrian safety improvements. And I believe in the memo, we've tried to address the questions from Strong Towns and the project. We also have an attachment in there that shows what the how we've incorporated, how the NCOD has incorporated as many items as they could in from the WABA requests. And I thought that the Awana requests were in there as well, which were received as many as like 5 years ago. So my hope is that the majority of the requests that have been received through the last 5 years have been incorporated. And if they can't be incorporated, we've worked with them to understand why that is. So I don't think that if the project is to stay on track, I don't know that there are additional opportunities to impact or change the design of the project. It's a resurfacing project with some pedestrian safety improvements, substantial pedestrian safety improvements, in my opinion.
I have a comment, but I saw Sage has her.
Sure. Thank you, Jessica. And I haven't read the memo yet, so apologies if some of this is in it. I'll back up and say, first of all, that the community input from this particular project was the best I'd ever seen NCDOT do. We all met in a room, I think over a couple nights, and there were blown up maps of Haywood Road like I'd never seen them do, with all the options and rulers and overlays, and you could really play with it. So I do think that was great. And then jump forward to a couple months ago, I saw that Kim and I were attached to an email from DOT that said, hey, the plans are final. We're meeting in 15 minutes to review it. Sorry, we forgot to invite you, kind of thing. So that might have been our other opening to have input. But jumping forward to now, I don't want us to slow it down. My question is, and this might be in the memo, is are some of the things that are being requested that would obviously have more cost able to be done later, like the painting of the bike lane comes to mind, versus some of the things that we may want to push on now that are, like one of the recommendations was to reduce the width to 10 feet everywhere. And that is obviously something we couldn't just come back and do later without redoing all the striping and stuff. So does the memo speak to that? Or if not, could you speak to that, Jessica?
It does. It attempts to. I think many of the things that were suggested by the Strong Towns group, unfortunately, those are things that, regardless of the timing that we're in right now, NCDOT would put on the city to add to the project under an encroachment agreement. So such as the green paint, such as the conversation about green infrastructure, those are all things that they would require us to do anyways. So they are items that we could consider budgeting for. If that is something that the council is interested in, we would have to work that into either the city's transportation operating budget or a future CIP project.
Okay, perfect. Because I know this budget cycle, there's no room. So even if we wanted to do these, it would be an enormous conversation and lift. But I'm happy to hear that some of it could be done later, because some of them are great ideas. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, I feel pretty strongly that the additions that Strong Towns is suggesting may also be TDA, might be something that TDA could help fund, because they have funded similar types of partnerships in the past that enhance the user experience, if you will, in a corridor. I'm thinking of Cox Avenue or the improvements on the I-26 project. So I would hope that we would explore every opportunity for funding, because the state's funds could be used as the match in that situation. So I don't know if Jamie's on this call, but I know she's kind of keeping track of the list of things that we want to ask the TDA for. But that would be, I think, an opportunity for funding for something like this. The other thing is, you know, I gotta say, I am still a strong supporter of the Merriman Avenue Road Diet. I use it every day, multiple times every day, and I do love it. But having been in communities where bike ped infrastructure has been retrofitted to accommodate pedestrians and bikes, there's a bad way to do it and a good way to do it. And I think what Strong Towns is suggesting for Haywood, the Haywood Road Corridor, would really help people understand how to use it appropriately and safely. On the Merriman Avenue Road Diet, there is no delineation. With the bike lanes have a stripe. There is a bike symbol every once in a while. There's no difference in coloration during the beginning several months, you know, and the width varies. So it's not like a standard width for a bike lane. It just depends on how wide Merriman Avenue happens to be in that area. They keep the lane a constant width, but they let the bike lane width vary. And sometimes it's so wide, you frequently see people think it's another road lane, and cars will get in it. And it's not colored green. It doesn't have a bike symbol there. And it creates this incredible confusion. I mean, it's pretty much the most minimalist way I've ever seen a road retrofitted to accommodate bike infrastructure. So, and unfortunately creates incredible confusion for the cars and cause more backups. I think people, generally speaking, have figured it out as long as they're locals, but you see out-of-state driver's license plates and they're totally confused and they're in that lane, or they're even stopped in the bike lane. I mean, to me, it's not just, does it look cool? Is it, you know, whatever. It's really about being able to use it appropriately. And when you go to places like, you know, other cities like Washington, D.C., where I was hanging out last month, and they've added bike lanes to every downtown street there is. They're protected, they're delineated clearly, everybody understands how to use them, whether they have to stop at the intersection or not. Anyway, I could go on, but I really hope, and I do appreciate our DOT partners, but I really do hope that what we're talking about here isn't really the difference between a safe way to use a road or not. So that's my little soapbox about these projects.
Okay, so if there are no other comments or questions on the Haywood Road project, I'm going to highlight items K, L, and N together. All are associated with the municipal building capital repairs and restoration project. Item K is a contract amendment with Terracon that will add design services for a relocated police forensics lab, forensics offices, and a renovated fitness center in the Muni building. Item L is a design build contract with Carolina Cornerstone Construction for the upfit of the Jackson building, which will serve as fire headquarters, house the fire marshal's office, and house the Joint Police Fire Fitness Center while the Muni building is under construction. And you may recall at your April meeting, you approved a 5-year lease for the use of the Jackson building. Item N is a lease for fire logistics warehouse space needed during the Muni building construction project. And last item that I had planned to cover is item O. Item O is an exciting project that was highlighted during this week's Equity and Engagement Committee meeting. And it is a contract with Solutions, Inc., which is a minority-owned firm out of Greenville, South Carolina, which will provide equipment necessary to conduct hybrid meetings for boards and commissions in our first floor conference room in City Hall. Under this new scenario, board members will have the option to participate remotely in board and commission meetings, and members of the public will also have the opportunity to provide public comment remotely to those board and commission meetings. So a great additional accommodation to hopefully reduce barriers to participation in those meetings. And we anticipate being able to start accommodating hybrid meetings by the end of the calendar year. Moving on to presentations and reports, we do have a couple of different presentations scheduled. First, under the city manager's report, there will be employee recognition recognizing Fire's Swiftwater Rescue Team, who was recently deployed to Southeast Texas to assist with flood response. Item B, you'll be hearing from Lou Bleiweiss on his annual State of the Airport presentation. And then item C, Nathan Moneyham with NCDOT will be presenting on the I-26 connector project. And he'll be giving an update on the status of their design build project now that they've got Archer Wright selected as the design build firm. And he'll be providing an overview on planned community engagement as they go through this optimization and refinement period to finalize the scope and hopefully finalize their contract with Archer Wright and begin construction. Moving on to public hearings, I do want to note that public hearing A, which is the HUD Annual Action Plan for Home and CDBG, is being continued to the July 23rd meeting. And I'm going to turn it over to Ben to cover items B and C under public hearings.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, Mayor, members of council. I'm going to share my screen real quickly. You do have two public hearings at your next council meeting. The first is property off 172 Moody Avenue, and actually maybe the more familiar way to know where this property is off Smoky Park Highway, even though it's addressed off Moody. So that's the location in the city. And what's proposed is a mixed-use development that has 349 residential units and approximately 21,000 square feet of commercial space in this initial development. This is one of the projects that, because of its size, the number of units, it is required to have conditional zoning approval from council. You can see the site plan on the screen. We have the 350 residential units are spread out in a mix of different buildings. So they're spread out in 7 buildings that are off Smoky Park Highway to the rear of the site. In addition to the residential units, it'll have the typical clubhouse, gazebo, playground, pool, those types of amenities you see for multifamily. And then along Smoky Park Highway, there is currently Lot 1, which is on the far right of the lots facing Smoky Park. That is proposed to be a grocery store that's 20,000 square feet in size, 1 story, approximately 30 feet in height. And then you'll see lot 2 and 3 are planned future commercial sites. So we don't know what the development proposals are for those 2 tracks yet. This conditional zoning did go before the TRC, who recommended approval. Went to Planning and Zoning Commission at their June meeting. They also recommended approval on a 6-0 vote. And finally, planning staff is recommending approval. Any questions on this one? Councilwoman Turner.
Yeah, those drawings are too small for me to read, but does it have any family size units or affordable units?
It does not propose affordable units in this development.
Do you know anything about family size or bedroom size?
I do not, but we'll flag that on the follow-up document and be prepared to have that level of detail.
This reminds me of what we are trying to achieve with urban place zoning, except that this is an urban place. And I guess I haven't even seen this one move up, so I was surprised to see it in the queue, but I'll look forward to the hearing Tuesday. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions on public.
Ben, who's the applicant on that?
I'm trying to get out of my full screen here so I can look. I do not have easy access to the petition, so again, we'll have to follow up with that.
So I'm having a little trouble placing this project. Can you give the address again?
It's 172 Moody.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm not. When
It's
I
right
do
across
that,
from the Buncombe County Sports Park by the urgent
Oh.
care there.
yes.
Google Maps will
thank
pull
you.
it up. It just looks like a house with a field behind it currently.
But what's the acreage of the project? The size, it looked large, so I was asking. It looked pretty big.
It's 137 acres, and the owner is Acton Woods,
Okay.
Thomas and Laura Thrash Limited Partnership.
Okay. This is a
Okay.
Thrash project. Okay. Thank you. I read that elsewhere and I wasn't connecting these two. Thank you.
If the applicant does happen to be listening, I would like to speak with them. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on that one? And I just got just a real quick clarification on the acreage. It looks like the acreage is actually 42.65 acres. So I think the wrong acreage was on the request form, according to planning staff. So it's just under 50 acres. But we'll have those details, of course, in the staff report. Moving on to the next item, this is a rezoning request at 28 Robert Street. So this is in the River Arts District. This particular request is kind of unique because this is a request to remove 8 properties along Robert Street from the River Arts Forum District into straight RM8 zoning. So again, this is not a conditional zoning request. So this is just a general rezoning request. The 8 properties are currently vacant and undeveloped, and were rezoned to the RAD, to the River Arts Forum District in 2017 when that effort was underway to rezone a significant portion of RAD into that new Forum District. So the main consideration for you is by moving from the RAD district to RM8, it really changes the range of allowable uses and the potential form of any future development. So a couple of key highlights related to this is our RAD form district allows a broader mix of uses. So when you're in the RAD form, you're able to develop non-residential uses and integrate those when possible with multifamily. So kind of truly mixed use development. One key distinction in the RAD is the RAD does not allow single family detached structures, the RAD form district, whereas the RM8 district does allow single family detached and duplex dwellings. But of course, the downside to RM8 is you don't have the allowance for commercial, office, or retail uses. So again, of course, in our form district does have some prescriptive criteria about the form or the design of whatever the development will be. This particular item went to Planning and Zoning Commission at their 6-7 meeting, June 7th. They did recommend in favor of this on a 6-0 vote. And on this particular request, the planning staff is actually recommending denial of this request. Any questions on this one?
I have a couple questions, and I appreciate knowing staff's perspective because I'm a little confused by this one because it was so recently rezoned. But you know, this comes up in the past with our various CZ hearings. Some people submit their plans and elevations and what they plan to do as part of the rezoning, and it's not required. Apparently, we learned along this way. So this one has not shared what it hopes to do with the rezoning. Is that correct?
That is correct. And because it's a straight rezoning, they're not required to do so.
Right. Problematic in some ways. Thank you. And if the developer happens to be listening, I would more than happily talk with them.
And also, Ben, I'd like to ask a question. And because of that RM8 zoning, it really does not, it gives them more leeway as far as not having to come to council for specific products, as far as what I'm saying, as far as even with the RM, the multifamily type thing, how would that be impacted by coming to planning and zoning for any type of approval. They wouldn't have to go through that, right? They wouldn't have to go through planning and zoning for a lot of approval things that normally you would have to go through, like going to the RMA, right? Because it's more or less sort of falls under residential. Is that?
Yeah, if I think I'll try to restate so to do the zoning change, it of course requires this process, but if they were going to develop something on these parcels, and it would depend on what they propose, but
yeah.
Probably the majority of development could be done administratively, so it wouldn't require these steps through a planning and zoning and council process. Again, it depends on the scope of that development, but yeah, the basic zoning of it, whether it's form district or RMA, allows a number of uses that can be done at the staff level.
So why is staff? I'm trying to figure out why is staff against it if planning and zoning is for it. I guess that's really my concern.
Yeah, I'll have to, I can speak from staff's perspective. I think, there was a lot of effort that went into establishing the River Arts Form District back in 2017, a lot of community engagement. So I think the idea was that area of town, would become more dense and have more of an urban feel to it and have a mix of uses, multifamily, small commercial, office. So I think staff comes from the perspective of trying to preserve that work that was done with the RAD form code and having development that occurs that's consistent with that. So, I mean, and again, the staff report will detail staff recommendation a little more than I have, but I think that's the basis of it, is the integrity of the form district.
And so they're more or less trying to make this more of a housing community.
Yeah, I mean, if it's RMA, then it'll have to be, kind of limits the range of uses really to just residential. So you wouldn't have any type of commercial or office, non-residential uses. And then one last thing I got a note from staff, and from the staff's recommendation, the change in the district also creates some inconsistencies with our comp plan and some of the input from the weekend neighborhood. So there are some policy concerns from the staff perspective as well, which again is why they're recommending denial.
Yeah, it's essentially a downzoning. I noticed that the Riverfront Commission isn't listed as a review body on this, and I can't remember if that's because we pulled design review out from under them, but it used to be that committee reviewed anything within a mile of any river in the county. Did we get any input from them, or do they no longer participate in that?
I don't believe they participate in just rezoning applications, the straight rezoning.
Oh,
again, in this case, there really wouldn't be any development form to look at. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, they aren't
formally
required in the process anymore, but there have been two. I mean, I just joined that committee maybe 3 months ago, and there's been two that have come through recently, but not this one.
So it's more about the project. Again, sounding more and more like a downzoning. Okay, thank you.
But does it, I guess what would help me, Ben, when this comes to council is to understand, just in terms of the table of uses, like it is curious to request a downzoning. It does make me wonder whether the request for a downzoning would be able to enable something to happen by right that would otherwise snag a requirement to come to council.
That's exactly what
I'm looking at it. This is a collection of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 undeveloped lots. And if the new zoning would allow, say, for example, multifamily and allow for an apartment complex to go there, I could see why planning and zoning would want that. I don't know if the overlay district would, there is a mix of commercial and residential uses along that road right now. This is also a sloped part altogether parcel, kind of slopes up the hill. Anyway, I wouldn't want to inadvertently grant a rezoning that resulted in a by right project that basically made the entire neighborhood go bananas. So that's my worry. So if there's a way to kind of understand what's allowed by right now, what would be allowed by right under the rezoning in sort of simple terms, that would be helpful.
It makes me wonder about this I don't know if this is true in this applicant case, but we're hearing more and more that applicants are not coming to council with the larger projects because just going to council is problematic. And it makes me think about our multi-family efforts around getting to a community benefits table and a better approval process. And I wonder if this one might have presented itself differently if that had been in place. You know, the sooner we do that, I think the better off we'll be.
And Mayor, I think you asked the right question in terms of uses, the use table, because it may not be, again, this is a straight up zoning, so any use that's permitted in that district would be allowed. But for the River Arts District, the overlay, there are certain uses that aren't permitted, like single family. So if there are single family uses proposed, it would not be permitted in this district. But again, we don't know the actual proposed development because it's a conventional zone request.
If I can build on that, Ms. Campbell, you're exactly right. We don't know, so some of it's speculation, but I will note, Mayor, to try to answer your question directly, the principal difference between the two districts, the one that exists and the one that's proposed, is the ability to do single family dwellings. So again, we don't have that specific direction from the applicant, but we can look at the allowable uses for each district and we can kind of zero in on that being the primary difference between the two.
Well, and so maybe, you know, it's a fairly benign request because they want to do single family homes there, which, you know, frankly, given the communications we've received from that neighborhood over the years, might be more consistent with what they would want. And it would be onerous to bring a CZ forward for each and every lot. I don't know. I mean, be great if hopefully the applicant will give us a little more insight into this.
Okay, good discussion on the public hearing items. I know the planning staff is watching, so we'll take that information and be better prepared. I think with that, if Rachel, I think that concludes the review of the council agenda. So I will go ahead and move it over to Ms. Campbell. I think we're going to do our council committees next, and I believe the first one is environment and safety.
All right, thank you, Ben. Environment and Safety Committee meeting meets on June the 25th at 11 o'clock. And we have two items, both of which are informational items and updates. The first for information sharing is the solicitation ordinance update. And essentially the committee requested kind of an update in 4 to 5 months to see how, as you all recall, the changes that were made in the solicitation ordinance in terms of implementation, where solicitation can occur. So we're going to provide, well, APD will be providing an update of panhandling statistics, including high traffic zones and the like. The next item for update will be the Asheville Parks and Recreation 10-year plan update. We're going to go into a little bit of detail on what's being proposed, because at the next meeting we hope in July, we will be asking for a recommendation from the committee that will then go to full council in August for final adoption. Again, this is information sharing, but we hope to have a fairly robust conversation on both of those agenda items, and that will conclude our meeting.
Deborah, just a brief future request. I'd love to know when the hotel overlay comes back to us for review and possible updates, since you're speaking of updates in general. Not to just let us know.
Absolutely. And Ben, that usually goes to PED, so keep track of that one.
Yeah, I'll flag that, Councilman Turner, as a future update. So,
and okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say Policy, Finance, and Human Resources Committee, which is my committee as well, or the committee that I support, has been canceled. That July meeting has been canceled. And I think Planning and Economic Development Committee is next.
Right, thank you. Planning and Economic Development is scheduled for July 8th, and we have 3 items on the agenda for that meeting. The first, planning staff is going to provide an update on their strategy and really their plan for updating our UDO. I know that's something that we've had a lot of conversations about in the community. There's a lot of need for that. So staff will bring to PED for PED's feedback, kind of a strategy and a process for how we can begin to update the UDO, prioritize those updates, and make sure that they're consistent with our adopted plans and our city council strategic priorities. Councilman Ullman.
And so Ben, is this a place where Councilman Turner brought up the hotel overlay or multifamily overlay, like those are tactics to get towards certain goals. This discussion at PED is really setting up us figuring out which strategies are our top priority to help us get to our council goals. So it might not be a hotel overlay or a multi-benefit overlay, but it might be incentives to upzone in certain corridors. So it'll be like choices like that, and then we can kind of talk through, because there's only so much staff time or resources in the UDO. It'll help us kind of get alignment as electeds pointing towards where we want staff to dig in. Because I think I'm eager, I'm excited, and I think that there's been lots of ideas, but this is kind of the step moving us towards getting clear focus so staff can roll up sleeves with committees like P&Z.
Right, that's a great summary, Councilman Ullman, and I'm sorry, Ms. Campbell, I cut you off on that.
No, I interrupted you, I apologize. Ms. Ullman, I think you are correct in terms of, we've got a lot of conversation out there in the community about the UDO and what's broken and what's not broken, and obviously we've got concerns by council. And what we're trying to do is to discern, quite frankly, what is the most broken so that we can prioritize those resources, unfortunately, scarce resources, to address the concerns that we have. We know already that the residential piece, both multifamily and single family, there are some concerns, particularly related to how quickly or how onerous or how type of obstacles related to the delivery of affordable units that we know we probably need to tweak and so forth. So I think it's a broader conversation about, what are our goals, and then in terms of addressing the UDO sections, how do we address them in a very strategic way? But what I have had conversations with some folks in the community, I don't know that we can take on a total rewrite of the UDO right now. We just cannot do it. It's just, number one, it's expensive. Even if we have the resources from a financial perspective, we don't have the staff resources.
Yeah, and I'll just jump into that. The goals I feel like council's been like wanting are around addressing housing, and the UDO. The goal to me isn't clean up the UDO so it's perfect and polished. It's remove barriers and point development in the direction to get us what we want around housing. So I just appreciate that it'll be more surgical in nature than wildly comprehensive, because there's a bunch of stuff that I just don't think are the crisis in the community. So I think that's a strong approach, and I'm glad that y'all are being thoughtful about that.
And I also feel that because everyone's dealing with the affordable housing issue, and because it's almost like a moving target, because so many different ideas and different directions that people are going to address these needs. And I think like actually trying to, like you said, find strategic areas and target places that we can put in place now to start getting the effect we need is more important than trying to overhaul something that may be outdated by the time we actually finish and get it out there. So that's just my concern.
Okay, thank you. Good discussion. And then on a very much related note to the discussion we just had in terms of aligning our resources and priorities, the second item on the PED agenda is the review of proposed text amendments to the UDO that the Planning and Zoning Commission and Urban Forestry Commission have recently put forward. So we'll have a chance to go through those, but also, I think more importantly, we have the chance to make sure that the work our advisory boards want to do on the UDO is also in alignment with what council's establishing as priorities for that work. So again, we're excited about the opportunity to talk about the UDO in general, and then talk about how that connects to some of the work our advisory boards are proposing. And then the last item on PED is an update on Art Place. We'll have Jessica Morris, our Assistant Transportation Director, and Amber Wagner, our Transit Planning Manager. And they're going to give an update on the Art Place project and the proposed scope of work for grant funding that's been made available to the city. And that's just information sharing. So any other questions on the PED agenda? If not, I will turn it over to Rachel Wood.
Thanks, Ben. So the next Housing and Community Development Committee meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. on July 16th, and we have 3 key agenda items. First will be a continuum of care update. That will be provided by Emily Ball. This will include updates on the COC board, which was recently established, details on the new committees and work groups that have been established, and information on current federal funding opportunities to support the work of the COC. And I will note that tonight there is a COC board meeting and then a general membership meeting as well in Harrah's. Next, Emily will provide an update on a permanent supportive housing provider at 148 River Ford. This is going to be reviewing the continuum of care's recommendation for a permanent supportive housing provider at the property, and committee action will be requested on this item with planned council consideration at your July 23rd meeting.
Rachel, can you translate what project is that?
That's the Ramada project.
Why aren't we, can we just call it Ramada?
Absolutely, the former Ramada.
Rachel, the COC.
I was just gonna add to that, the COC's meeting tonight to hear that. Yeah.
Yes.
So they are going to be discussing the Ramada specifically, the COC?
Yes.
Or
yes, tonight.
Perfect. Thank you.
This is the potential, this is the interested purchaser. Yes.
Yeah, and the COC is going to be vetting that potential service provider, making a recommendation first to the HCD. Housing and Community Development Committee will take action, and then council will take action at your July meeting.
And we will again have to approve the 1.5 million over 3 years.
That's correct. That's the proposed funding source for 3 years of service for permanent supportive.
And because it's a different developer now, we have to reapprove.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So Sage, just so you know, the COC has had pretty lengthy discussions about this process already. And, the COC is made up of ABCCM and Homeward Bound and lots of providers in the community. And so they're looking at vetting the proposal, the fact that there is a request for funding to provide the supportive services, and to try to, there's been some discussion about what is appropriate in terms of the request for that funding, and whether they should be self-sustaining without that funding or not. So I know that's going to be part of the discussion. And then also what the services will be, who the potential service providers will be. So kind of all the things that you would want to be examined anew, they will be doing. And they, I think this is kind of a test run for the new COC's role in our community. It is a collection of providers that are going to be making recommendations, and when those recommendations come to council and commission, it'll be very important to understand our relationship to one another and whether or not we carry out the recommendations that the COC makes for us. So just keeping that in mind, they're taking this job very seriously. They just did a 2-day orientation or last week, and they had a pretty lengthy discussion to decide whether or not they should appoint a task force for this particular project or the full COC should hear it. They decided the full COC is hearing it because it is time sensitive, so there wasn't a lot of time to get this going.
And your representatives on the board and myself and the mayor.
Yes, Deborah and I are both serving. I don't get to vote; she does, but we're both on the board. Yeah.
It's live streamed. Is that right? Is it a public
I
meeting?
think so. Yeah. I think it is. And it'll be tonight. It'll be at Harris. Yep.
Oh, great.
Starting at 5.
I can't attend, but I will try and tune in. And good luck.
Okay, the last item we have slated for the July HCD meeting is a review of accomplishments that occurred throughout the course of fiscal year 2024, and then a discussion on work plan development for FY 2025. At Tuesday's Equity and Engagement Committee, we actually decided to cancel the July meeting. At Tuesday's meeting, we went over the FY 2024 accomplishments and had a really productive discussion around planned work session items for FY 2025. And we decided to spend the month of July refining those work plan items, and we'll have a follow-up discussion at EEC's August meeting. So the July meeting for Equity and Engagement Committee has been canceled. Moving on to a review of our 8-week agenda items, we are entering our summer schedule, and what that means is there is only one council meeting in July and one council meeting in August. At your July 23rd meeting, there are several noteworthy public hearing items slated. Those include setting the bond order and resolution for the general obligation bond referendum, conditional zoning for 767 New Haw Creek Road, and then the HUD annual action plan for CDBG and home funding in fiscal year 2025. There are also a few noteworthy unfinished business items. Those include an extension request that will be coming from the Community Reparations Commission, updates on McCormick Field contracts, and Dave Dundas will actually be providing updates on that information later as part of today's agenda briefing, and then a resolution funding permanent supportive housing at 148 River Ford, which, as we just discussed, is the site of the former Ramada. And this will be coming after discussion tonight with the COC, followed by Housing and Community Development Committee review, and then going to full council for review. And then your next city council meeting is August 27th. And the one noteworthy item I will bring to your attention is that will be where we're going to be asked to adopt the Recreate Asheville plan. Moving on to other issues and updates, we do have 2 scheduled items, and then I know we may have discussion on other items. The first item is an update on the Duke substation, and Rachel Taylor was originally slated to provide this presentation. Rachel is not feeling well, so we're going to have Ben Woody provide the presentation, and then we do have 2 representatives, Justin Brown and Jennifer Bennett, with Duke available to answer questions. So I'll turn it over to Ben.
Thanks, Rachel. As Rachel alluded to, I am going to step in on short notice and work through this presentation. I will try to be thorough yet brief as I go through the information. Next slide, Katie. And again, for council, just as Rachel said, we do have Jennifer and Justin here from Duke Energy that will be available to answer any questions or add any information that I am not providing. So real quickly, what we're going to talk about today is project updates for the Rankin substation, also for the Patton Avenue property, on the development process, timeline, and really we're going to review some of the next steps, particularly ones that are required of council. As council, we've discussed this before in the past. This is a key piece of infrastructure upgrade for Duke Energy to meet our energy consumption needs in downtown Asheville. Really today, we're going to review the 3 steps that council has before you that are required. One is there's a conditional zoning amendment for Patton that we'll talk about. There's the closure of a paper right-of-way off Hiawassee. And then finally, there's the requirement for a land exchange And all three of those are necessary for this project to move forward as proposed. So if you'll go to the next slide, Katie. Oh, there we go. So project backgrounds. Again, we've talked about this in the past and the need for this for Duke Energy to update the substation location. One of the key things I think that we were able to come to kind of an agreement on through this process is that really rebuilding the the Rankin Avenue station in the existing location was the most feasible option and met the needs of both the community, city, and Duke. So we kind of landed in a place, I think, that tried to address the needs of all three of those entities. We haven't provided council an update in some time, but throughout that time, Duke and the city staff have been working together to really review and make sure that we were consistent with some of the things that came up when we started this process in fall of 2022. And we continue to work with Duke Energy throughout this process. And of course, one thing I'll note is when the Rankin Avenue substation is fully complete and rebuilt, Duke does intend to move forward with their permanent gas insulated substation at the Patton Avenue property. So really, we're talking about two things today that are happening. Councilwoman Turner, do you have a question?
Well, you said it, GIS, gas insulated, and that does stick with this, right? They're not trying to maneuver out of that.
No, not at all. And of course, that condition that requires that will remain in the conditional zoning for that property. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a context map. This is in reference to the Rankin Avenue substation. If you can go to the next slide, Katie, we'll go a little closer. And currently the land arrangement is the city owns a parcel on the corner of Hiawassee and Rankin. Duke Energy currently owns the other two parcels, and this is really where the land exchange will come in to allow the substation to move closer to the corner of Hiawassee and Rankin, and also to give some flexibility, but not only behind Thomas Wolfe, but really behind Harris Cherokee Center as well. Next slide, please. This is just an aerial of that same property. If we can go to the next slide. So there's a lot of things happening at once with this project, and I'm going to show you your decision points on the next slide. But really, there's three things that need to happen. One is when Duke needs the ability to put a temporary substation at their Patton Avenue property. That does require council to take an action on conditional zoning to allow that installation. The other piece is the Rankin substation itself. That does require a site plan approval from the city of Asheville. So they are in what's called the level 1 approval process. That'll need to be in place in order for them to move forward with the construction of the new Rankin substation. And then finally, in the midst of all of this, there is a real estate process that council needs to address, which is one, the closure of a paper street, and two is a land exchange that allows this to happen. So Katie, if you'll go to the next slide, I will show you what all that looks like in terms of what's next for council. So you'll be considering the following. On July 23rd, you'll approve the right-of-way closure hearing date. That's just setting the actual public hearing for the closure of that paper right-of-way off Hiawassee. On August 12th, we're going to bring this to PED. And what they'll be reviewing at that meeting is the land exchange with Duke Energy, and they'll make a vote to recommend that to council. And then finally, on August 27th, you'll have the three items all concurrently on that agenda. You'll be looking to close a paper right-of-way, which again currently is employee parking. You'll be asked to consider the conditional zoning for the temporary substation at Patton Avenue. And then finally, you'll be asked to approve a land exchange between Duke Energy and the city of Asheville. So August will be a busy meeting for this. Next slide. Just to look back about what got us here, and I think this is a really important slide that council should be aware of. The Duke project team has worked closely with our design review committee for their informal review. They have been to that committee in February. And I think have done a really good job of incorporating that committee's feedback into kind of the fencing and the decorative fencing that is proposed to enclose the substation. So again, I think you can see a lot of the committee's recommendations reflective of a visual I'm going to show you at the end of this slide deck. The other thing that Duke did is they went to the design review committee to take a look at the Patton temporary substation, and also incorporated, or is going to incorporate, some of the committee's feedback into that project as well. And then finally, in addition to those meetings with the design review committee, they've also had a number of neighborhood meetings regarding the temporary substation. I think overall those were good meetings. The biggest thing that we heard, I think, from the neighborhoods around the Patton site is ensuring that the GIS substation will move forward. And so, and the last little piece that's out there, that as all this happens, one thing that we're going to have to really closely monitor and work with Duke on is trying to minimize some of the impacts that'll come. There's a number of street closures we'll have to see both at the Rankin site and the Patton. So we're going to have to coordinate with Duke in terms of how they sequence their construction, but also how we can make sure that we minimize any street closures or traffic impacts to our surrounding properties, which in this case are both residences and businesses. Next slide. So really, again, we've talked about this. You're going to see a lot of the council actions will take place in August, and then following those actions, you'll see the prep work and then the construction begin at both sites. And that'll happen through the winter of 2024. Next slide, please. And then again, we've got just detailed out in a couple of key dates. I won't review this slide again, but it's in the slide deck if anybody needs to see it. Next slide, please. That's our key takeaways again. In the interest of time, Katie, I'm going to have you skip 2 slides forward, and I'll show a rendering, and we'll leave that on the screen for a minute and just ask for any questions from council. And again, we have Jennifer Bennett and Justin from Duke Energy here as well.
My question is actually related to the temporary. Do we have any visuals what a temporary substation looks like?
Hey, this is Justin Brown with Duke Energy. Yes, we do have renderings for the temporary substation, so we can send those to whoever you would like.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Roney.
So can you confirm for me that the required public meetings have already been scheduled or have taken place for this fullness of this project?
I know I participated in one.
For Justin and Jennifer, do you want to respond to that, or would you like me to? Either way is fine.
Sure.
I believe we've had all the neighborhood meetings required at this point.
Agreed, Justin. And we did have a follow-up meeting within the last 2 months or so with the Weekhand neighborhood on the Patton site.
Great. And then the other question I had was, this rendering is very helpful, but I had also seen another rendering that involved like a neon light show. And my previous questions were around, were we going to take this to our public art commission? Because the opportunity to have like public placemaking and murals seems to fit more with the character of downtown than a neon light show. I wasn't sure if those conversations are still happening. There does look like limited wall space to install public art at this rendering.
So we actually have an updated version of the renderings based on the input we got from the design review board, and that includes a more open wrought iron fence look. So there's not going to be any solid walls on the future substation fence. But regarding the lights, I wouldn't say it's a neon light show, but we did have some kind of aesthetic lighting. But which group did you say we should address that with?
Well, it was more of like a city procedural suggestion that if there was going to be a light display, it would be curious to me if that was fitting in with our public art mapping or resourcing, versus I know that there were other renderings of previous versions of this project that had a blank wall space. And if there's going to be a blank wall space, then we should have a plan for maintenance of it. We know that public art like murals is a more effective tool for graffiti deterrence.
I think I can speak to that, Justin, if you don't mind. I think that management of any type of light installation, which would really be done in coordination with the city and the desire to have that or not to have that. And then the management strategy of that, I think we would determine best route and what really the desire is for that area. I think that the intent was, does it increase the aesthetic of the site or does it not? And I think that was just shown as something that was an opportunity and a possibility to include in the design and the implementation. And then we would coordinate with the management of that, you know, in a line or in a way that would align with your standards, the city standards and the art, the desired effect of that. I think for the wall space, as Justin mentioned, and we can make sure that the team has that. I don't think we'll see a blank wall space that is available for our installation, but then also I think that helps to mitigate the kind of the potential for, to your point, the management of if there were to be graffiti or disturbance of that wall space.
I, for one, wouldn't mind seeing a canvas for future installation of public art. I think that fits in line with our goals for placemaking, but versus a wrought iron fence. But these are the kinds of conversations that I would imagine would bubble up at a public engagement or at an advisory board level.
Also, one other thing I did want to note is to the mayor's previous concerns about the time frame for removing the temporary substation, we did include language in the conditional zoning application that would require us to remove the temporary substation within 6 months of the Rankin substation being in service.
Thanks for that. That's shorter than I was anticipating.
Any other questions on this item before we let Jennifer and Justin go? Okay, well, I do, before I turn it over to Rachel, I do want to thank Duke Energy and Jennifer and Justin in particular. They've been great partners throughout, and we've really, I think, worked well with them to get where we're at today and try to make sure we're addressing concerns from both council and the community. So again, thank you, Jennifer and Justin. And yeah, hopefully next time we'll have Rachel back to give the presentation. So Rachel Wood, I'll turn it over to you for the remainder of the agenda.
Thank you, Ben. And as mentioned, as part of the 8-week look ahead, we do have several upcoming council actions scheduled for your July meeting associated with McCormick Field. So we've got Jade Dundas here today to provide just a general status update on the project and also give you a preview on the reason behind several of the council actions that you're going to be requested to take at your July meeting. So I'll turn it over to Jade.
Thank you, Rachel, and good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. Jade Dundas, Capital Projects Director. As Rachel said, is that we are moving through the design and getting real close to the construction and the award of construction, bidding and award of construction for McCormick Field. We really are planning. I'm presenting on July at the July meeting, and so felt like it was important for us to be able to get this information, as much information in front of you as soon as possible, so you can process this and generate any questions. We will be back at the next agenda briefing to answer any questions you might have. So Katie, next slide, please. As I've made reference to, is the time frame on this, as you are all aware, has been very tight. This project was approved conceptually last spring of 2023, and we have been pretty much in continuous effort throughout the last year to be able to pull this thing to a point where we could actually bid it in order to meet the needs and the expectations of the tourists, and being able to not have an impact on their 2026 baseball season. So the target really is everything rests upon the opening day of April 2026. There's been a strong effort to bring this into the allotted budget of $38.5 million. That 38.5 represents additional funds that are brought to the table by the tourists. So it was 37.5 and now it's 38.5. But also it's very important, again, from a timing standpoint, for us to not have to be able to have to reconsider value engineering after the bid. So we're really trying to position ourselves that it's as seamless as possible through the bid process. All involved are working diligently to create a project. And when I say all involved, I'm not going to try to recognize everybody, but this has been a tremendous team effort. It's been council being able to authorize, but also every staff person from our purchasing to permitting folks. Really, it's just been a team effort, including our grantors, as well as the tourist organization. They've been great to work with. Really, the objectives of this are to improve the fan experience, to meet Major League Baseball, deferred maintenance, and then also to have the lowest impact on the neighbors. The neighbors have been good partners in this as well. And then also a broad contractor-led business inclusion effort to generate interest in the project that would create a competitive and inclusive bidding. So Katie, next slide. This is our representative schedule. There's so many other activities that are involved in between this. This is like the last couple of years plus the next couple of years. As you can see, the majority of the last, almost 50% of the schedule is construction, which is impactful, but there's been a lot of work that has happened in order to get us to where we are today. All of this is reflected, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in other slides. Katie, next slide. Okay, so again, kind of a overall breakdown, a little bit of a breakdown of our budget is that we are anticipating soft costs to the order of about $4 million. Those include survey, design, inspection, and construction administration. Construction budget is around $32.5 million, and then owner costs, which include permitting fee or impacts to the sewer and water fees that we have to pay. Furniture and equipment, FF&E is furnishings and equipment, and then also a sign project to account for the history of the stadium is all in that owner costs. And I wanted to recognize funding partners in this, the county, TDA, Asheville Tourists, and the city. You will be seeing grant agreements come in July, but also that we're going to be following up with additional grant agreements in the future. Also, I just want to mention as we go through, I haven't highlighted the pictures, is these are renderings. We have shared some renderings. The first one was like the overall, and I discussed that in our quarterly update. Some of the graphics that are displayed in the renovation project, but also just some of the improvements that are being made. The bottom right is the suite space that'll be, and that's also the face of the building, which is the main administration and locker rooms for the home team, batting tunnels. So a lot of the needs and requirements of the Major League Baseball team are accounted for in this in this building, and then also throughout the rest of the field. So next slide, Katie. Okay, design and value engineering. Again, the objectives of this project are to meet Major League Baseball player development league requirements, improve the fan experience, expand non-baseball events, so essentially trying to open this up to additional concerts and other activities. And then to address deferred maintenance is an important part of this project. We went down a path for an original design that had a lot of construction in the right field area. It envisioned a concourse that wrapped around the entire facility, pushed right field. If you ever take a look at the McCormick Field in comparison to other baseball parks, right field's kind of squashed. And so we were trying to get that pushed out a little bit. The budget for that was significantly over what we had budgeted, or the estimates rather for that were significantly over what we had budgeted. So we had to pivot And so most of the improvements are in the left field now, which was a little more accommodating from a space standpoint. We're maintaining the wall where it's at. The overall footprint of this is only slightly larger than what it is today. The design team, including the architects, construction manager, and the tourists and city staff, worked diligently to find a solution that was within that budget. And we do believe through a lot of iterations of budget development and value engineering, we truly believe, we're very confident that we have that a project that can be built for that 38.5. And that's total budget. Construction is slightly smaller than that. And then, so as I mentioned, there were significant updates from the original to the revised concept. So next slide, Katie. Okay, so all of this has been pretty involved engagement process through the community. In the fall, when we were planning on having a much bigger footprint for this, we had to go through a conditional zoning process. Again, recognizing staff for helping us who aren't developers, aren't doing this stuff every day. We had a really great collaborative staff effort to be able to walk us through the conditional zoning process, which included also meeting with the Easton Valley and the Oakhurst neighborhoods. Conditional zoning went to P&Z and then got council approval. May of 2024, after we had to pivot and change the concept that we were going for, we also felt like it was important to go to Urban Forestry Commission, which was aware that the previous impact was going to have previous concept was going to have a significant impact on the slopes and the surrounding vegetation. Wanted to provide them with an update that we were going to preserve a lot of the existing vegetation. Also wanted to do the follow-up, which we just recently done with the Easton Valley Street Neighborhood Association. They warmly accepted us into their last meeting at Stevens Lee, which is another good project that we'll highlight later. And then the Oakhurst neighborhood, we had an on-site meeting, just really kind of give them an idea of what the plans were and how we were moving forward, and then also to get their feedback. There is one more meeting for these neighborhoods, and where we'll have the contractor lead that effort, and it'll be very focused on the impacts of construction and and be able to collect their feedback and make connections so that they can have that relationship with the contractor through the project. We find that that's a really powerful relationship to have neighbors connected with contractors. Not eliminating staff in that, but it's really helpful for us to be able to establish that type of communication. Feedback from the neighbors generally is parking is a concern. We've heard that for a long time and a lot of years, but they do also have some positive comments about the way the tourists have been conducting the parking plan. We made an effort to kind of retool and expand the parking plan last spring in 2023. And that was reflective of it's definitely an iterative process. It's reflective of some of the successes that the tourists have had over the last couple of years, and generally getting good feedback. There are still some very specific points of concern, but this parking plan is we're looking into those. But the parking plan is really has been applied to other events and will be continued to roll out in other events as it applies to the two stadiums, Memorial and McCormick. And then we're also working with other departments to minimize the operational impacts that happen just from trash collection and site security and those sort of things. And so definitely other concerns that we're aware of and are trying to work through. Next slide. Katie, oh, there you go. Okay, thank you. Okay, business inclusion has been an effort that has started in early this spring and will continue through the project bidding process. It's led by the contractor, Bloom and WC Construction, supported by staff. Again, another great coordination effort from our business inclusion office. There's been a strong local focus in those outreach efforts, but also, as suggested by the recent disparity study, those outreach efforts have expanded across the state. So we are looking to cast a wide net to bring those that can help and are interested in helping to this project, so we can be as inclusive and competitive as possible. I've listed some of the meetings. I think it's important to highlight that these are a combination of in-person and virtual meeting. The kickoff meeting in April was in person at Harrah's. We've gotten great attendance throughout the efforts, 47 people at that meeting. Virtual meeting on May 9th, and where 38 people. Bloom has an interesting ongoing outreach effort. They've identified several people on their construction team that are available through office hours. And so contractors that are interested can make connections with them and get one-on-one help. This has been something that has been used. That activity will continue throughout the bid process. Bid pre-meeting, and then also the field was virtual, and then the field networking session, which was just basically a contractor meet and greet, subcontractor meet and greet. Was held at McCormick Field in person, and 30 people attended. Our subcontractor list in total has 96 companies on it, and so that just gives us additional confidence that we'll be able to bid this and quickly get through the award without having to rebid a lot of the construction packages. Next slide is just an indication, just kind of what has been used by the Bloom team, developed through, again, a combination of effort with the city staff, to advertise and try to attract folks to their events. And again, it's been seemingly a very successful effort up to this point. Next slide, Katie. Sustainability is a piece of this. The overall sustainability achievements in this is there's a 36% overall reduction in the annual electrical consumption. These numbers are generated through an effort that we make with Duke on all of our projects, and there's a rebate program that we've been through, and a good portion of this will be because of all of the other bullets here. The LED lighting will be in the new facilities, and then all of the field lighting will be replaced with LED. Electric heating and air conditioning in all the new spaces. Building automation system that will allow for turn up and turn down of building temperatures subject to use. So this is not just the set it and forget it type situation of the old thermostats, and it's a little bit more smart than some of the technology that we have, where you have a thermostat that turns up and turns down based upon set time frames. You can actually pre-program these things to ramp up the cooling or heating, and then after the events are done, then they'll reset. Stormwater controls, underground storage to try to help mitigate some downstream flooding impacts, and then low flow technology on all the new and replacements plumbing equipment. Katie, next slide. All right, so as Ben mentioned with his presentation, we have some next steps. Again, as I said earlier, I'll be at the July 18th at council agenda briefing. So we have some time to process. If there's any questions that come up, we really want to present that opportunity to answer those questions. Also, hope at that point in time, we'll have some information on bidding and more information on we'll request on the July 23rd regular council meeting for authorization to award the authorization to amend the guaranteed maximum price for the Bloom WC construction team. Authorize, so this is just a list of other things that will be on that agenda. Authorize special inspections for Terracon, single source agreement for door hardware. It's just we want to make sure there's consistency in the door hardware that we're putting on the facility. Then as I'd mentioned, there's grant agreements with the TDA for $1.95 million. And then also the tourists letter of commitment for the additional $1 million that they're committing to the project. And then also it improved additionally somewhat related, will be an extension of the lease with the tourists for McCormick Field. Ongoing permitting processes. We're currently again collaborating with all of those permitting departments to work through that. And then the groundbreaking ceremony on August 28th, which is tentative, but that's generally the time frame we're looking at. And then just construction begins like it ends on opening day 2026. We're hoping to start on the last day of the season on September 2024. So, or as close to as possible the last day. That's around Labor Day is the anticipated start date. Last slide is key takeaways, and for the and I'll just let you all ask any questions you might have. Hearing none, well, I'll thank you for your time, and we'll be back in July.
And that concludes the presentations that staff had scheduled. Council, I know there may be other items that you wanted to discuss, and I'll let the mayor handle which, if any, of those items you want us to go through with the remainder of the time today.
Thanks, Rachel, for putting me in the hot seat. I'm assuming that this is the opportunity to have a discussion about potential newfound money that will be received by the city from the county after they vote in July as to what they're going to do with transit funds that would be remitted to the city. Can you? You've sent us some emails about this. Can you kind of just summarize a little bit about what's happened here and anyway, just give us a little bit of a history about why we're just learning about this now.
Sure, I'll give a quick synopsis, and then we do have our interim transportation director, Paul Ballard, and assistant transportation director, Jessica Morris, here to provide additional details. So Mayor, as you mentioned, on Tuesday of this week, the Buncombe County Commission received a presentation from county staff. And this was just a presentation, no action was taken, but the presentation was on the potential rescission of $1.37 million in unobligated prior year Federal Transit Administration grant funds from Buncombe County back to the city to support Asheville Rides Transit. The county commission had a productive conversation, and it did seem like the commissioners were supportive of this rescission. So the action will be taken at the July 16th county commission meeting, and then we would be in receipt of that revenue after that county commission action is taken. So from there, then we have the discussion around how do we utilize those funds to support transit, we have some ideas, but right now they're solely ideas. We as staff found out about this rescission at a meeting with county staff on Thursday of last week. So we were delighted with this opportunity, but we did not have a ton of time between last Thursday and even today's briefing, but definitely not before Tuesday's county commission work session to do analysis. So the transit team has done some analysis on potential options. We're happy to answer questions on that. Again, this is great news, and we are very appreciative from Buncombe County. Buncombe County staff did relay to us that the plan is for this to be one-time funding, so they did not give us any indication that they will be recommending future allocations to support transit. So just wanted to note that as well. But next steps in the process will be July 16th, Buncombe County Commission will take a formal vote before that revenue then being made available.
And Rachel, if I could, I may ask Jessica or Paul to kind of talk through how did we get here with the county in terms of them even considering a rescission.
Sure, Deborah, I'd be happy to summarize that. So the city of Asheville is the designated recipient for all federal transit grant funds for our entire region. Buncombe County, as well as other jurisdictions, are subrecipients for grants, and our staff manages all of those grants. And we have been working very diligently, especially over the last 6 months to a year, to improve our processes and procedures around grant tracking and administration. And we have been working with each of our subrecipients to look at all of their grants, both grants that have been obligated, which means that they have been officially programmed and agreed to through a grant agreement, and unobligated, which means funds that have been allocated to the region and then allocated again by our MPO, but haven't yet made it into an official grant agreement. And so we've been working with all our subrecipients to get a really solid grasp of where everybody's funds are, how much has been spent, how much has been unspent. And what we're seeing is that there are quite a few older grants that have either been obligated or not obligated yet, that our subrecipients just have not quite figured out yet how to best spend. And so they've been kind of in a holding pattern. And so we've been focusing on the funds that are set to lapse here in the near future. And so that was kind of the impetus for beginning a conversation with the county, was that they have about $1.1 million of funds that were set to lapse this year. And so that is kind of the starting point for conversations over the last few months with them, leading up to our meeting with them last week.
Thank you. Good job. I think Sage has a question.
Well, I have quite a few things to say, so I wanted to make sure you all are done with that portion of the conversation.
I think so.
Okay, thank you for all the info. It's a wonderful thing. I had a lot of talks with county commissioners over the last few days about this money and what it could mean potentially moving forward, if there are other ways that we could collaborate around the city's transit needs. But I want to back up to our past council meeting where we were kind of really struggling to get any kind of support around the budget and how to do it and what it might mean for taxpayers. And interestingly, I was having a really hard time with that meeting. And one of the things I almost did was just say I wasn't going to support either proposal in an effort to get us to brainstorm more. And I didn't do that. But then this happened, and it has me wondering if maybe we should. As you all know, we put a 0.63 cent tax increase out to the total of 1.2 or 1.25 million. I can't remember exactly. And now just a few days later, we have been potentially awarded with this money that could offset that tax increase, specifically because, and I said this at the council meeting, right now, our transit fund, enterprise fund itself is just not sustaining itself. You know, we know that it's getting $1 million plus from the parking fund. And this particular upcoming budget cycle, it's going to get about $2 million from our general fund. And had it not been doing that, we wouldn't have had all the conversations we had. We would have been able to raise our wages, all this. So just a little background. So if this money comes to us for transit, it kind of frees up some of that general fund money. And I am wondering if council would like to revisit that. I would support doing so. And it could be as simple as I don't want to mess with all of the pay plans and things that we have already established. I feel like that's already in motion. People know what they're expecting, and we shouldn't interfere with that. But we could plan to receive this money as one-time money, use it to offset the needs in the general fund for transit, and then remove the tax increase for taxpayers this year. It's maybe not that simple, but that's the base of what I'm asking us to consider. And I know this is unusual to do. We've adopted a budget. We have one last chance to change that at our next council meeting. So I have reached out to you all individually with what that could look like. And I've talked with staff, and I just wanted to take a moment to bring that up during this meeting in case there might be other councilwomen that would like to also reconsider how we're approaching the budget.
Councilwoman Roney.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions about the transit aspect of this. I watched the county's briefing, and that gave me more questions than answers. So we're the lead applicant for the FTA 5307 funds. We also are the reason we're eligible because the city of Asheville's population density is what makes us eligible for 5307 funds in the first place. So one of the questions I had was, when I was watching the county meeting, there was a conversation about improving a safe connection between the Trailblazer routes and our ART bus for the W2. And it seems like the question is moving it from Goodwill, where there's not a traffic light, to further down the road, which is interesting because it gets it much closer to where land use planning decision is on our agenda. But it has 3 traffic lights there. So what is the increased costs of service, and how does that factor into how much of this funding is actually available?
So that request, the first time we heard that request was Thursday afternoon. And, we do get requests from folks sometimes saying, can you extend a route this far, that far? And it's something that requires us to do some analysis because our routes are all timed and they're timed so that they all kind of come into the transit center at the same time. And so we can't just extend a route without oftentimes having to take that same amount of time or distance off the other end of the route. So their request to us was to analyze it, but they didn't go so far as to say that this is, a contingency for us giving you these funds. So that is something that we plan to do, is analyze it, see if it is possible. If it is possible, then we would also be able to calculate what that operational cost is. So right now we're not assuming any cost associated with that yet because we still have to do an analysis.
But it's not going to be a free service.
No, it would not. It would increase the city's cost. And so what Buncombe County is proposing is that if it could be done, then whatever that cost increase, it kind of comes off the top of what they're providing in those rescinded dollars. And I'd also just want to add that what they're also assuming in those rescinded dollars is funds for that we have been getting from them for the last few years to help support the cost of the 170 route, as well as the I think it's the WE1 that we extended up farther on New Leicester Highway. So just to be clear, the 1.37 million that they're referring to isn't a net 1.37. They're basically asking us to include some of the cost items that they provide for us as part of that overall total rescission.
So that's what I'm trying to get to. It's like, because we're the lead applicant, the idea that we didn't, that we knew that there's a number that we kind of like were aiming at, but it wasn't necessarily a public conversation yet. So I'm just trying to figure out how much total rescission at the end of the day are we really talking about? Acknowledging that just like water has increased costs, transit isn't going to make money. It's a public service we provide. It's core infrastructure for being able to get people to groceries and work and school and things like that. But we do have increased costs, and it's on our agenda. So it would just help me to know that with all of the numbers that are floating around, are we talking about 700,000? I've heard the number 300,000 floating around. Like, what are we really talking about as a number?
So right now, what I can say is 700,000 is worst case scenario, I guess you could call it. It could be as much as 960,000, give or take. But some of those funds that they're proposing as part of this rescission were awarded by the MPO through a competitive grant process. And so we need to meet with the MPO to make sure that they're okay with a trade, if you will, or with them rescinding funds to us that were originally awarded as part of a competitive scoring process. So we have a meeting with them tomorrow to broach that subject. I don't know that they'll that Tristan Winkler, their executive director, will be able to give us a 100% yes or no. We'll have to have that conversation, but worst case scenario, if you will, we would be receiving a net positive of about $700,000, which is great.
Right. We also don't want to send those funds back to the federal government when we need to use those dollars here, because we're providing service to the people of Asheville and Buncombe County right now with increased costs. So having a fuller number on what we're actually talking about would really help, I think, as we're talking about what our total budget options are, whether we're going to shift and use the dollars to replace what we were pulling from the general fund balance to cover our transit increase cost. What amount that really is would help. Thank you, Jessica.
So I should have probably added this to, in talking with county commissioners, I talked about, this is wonderful. Is there the potential that this could happen in future years? And there does appear to be some interest in collaboration among the county and the city, at least elected officials, to collaborate better. And one of the ideas we had was to come together joint committee style if needed to really flush out, could the county agree to several years of this funding in exchange or in unison with us saying, if you can, then we could probably do some extension of our routes, like the South Asheville one we've talked about. My concern is using one-time money to do something that will have annual costs that we may not have a mechanism to fund in the future. And I think we should probably do both. But I didn't want to get into the messy 700, but so y'all have succinctly explained it. So I'll kind of rephrase my suggestion to us, which you all have received, is to, similar to what I said at the council meeting, to really hedge our bets on our conservative performance and how we always outperform. So if we are worried that we will only get as little as 700 of the 1.3, then I would encourage us to look at things. I think the suggestion I had for y'all was the sales tax, bumping the sales tax 0.01%, brought in the additional revenue that we might be off target on, 0.01%. But that would balance the budget if you use 700 for transit and 0.01% increase in sales tax. And then we wouldn't have to do the tax increase. And if we missed our targets by that 0.01%, we would have the fund balance to fall back on. My goal here is really to reduce the tax increase or remove it altogether if we can. I don't know that there's support from the broader base of y'all, but I wanted to at least be able to share that idea because of the way the council meeting went and the two proposals. I never really got to flush out how I was approaching it. And I would love for us to take that approach, but I'll just leave it at that. It's up to y'all if y'all want to take on that endeavor.
Councilwoman Smith.
Jessica, you mentioned something when you first started. You said that in your grant accounting that you had been tracking unobligated dollars and looking at when those dollars may lapse. Do you know of any other unobligated dollars that may be rescinded back to the city?
That's yes, we do. That's the short answer. So every year we all get new allocations, and the city, since we have a big transit system, we're able to spend the money that we get through grants almost before we even get it. We spend it quickly. We spend it every year, and we don't have extra just kind of sitting and waiting to be spent. So our subs, on the other hand, don't have as extensive a service, and they also, part of I think one of the constraints, or the common constraint for some of our sub-recipients, which are smaller systems, is you have to have matching funds, right? So we get grant funds, we have to have 20% a match on that, which is no problem for the city given the cost and size of our transit system. But for other systems that are not as big, the matching funds are often a limiting factor for those folks to spend money. And so we've been having conversations as a region about that, trying to see if there is an efficient way to distribute and allocate those funds on a regional basis. so that they're put into use in a timely manner, because we do not want to see funds lapse. And honestly, we just want to see funds get spent, whether it's us or Buncombe or Henderson County. We want to see those funds go into service being provided to the community. So the MPO is part of that conversation. And so
my thought is going to CDBG when we made a decision because of the timeliness of the dollars being spent, we decided to use it on some internal projects. So I'm thinking that if you're doing the same type of tracking and you see that some unobligated dollars are very near its deadline, instead of sending the money back, I was wondering if we could actually absorb that in some of our programming.
Yes, and that's exactly what Buncombe County is offering to do with some funds that they know are going to be lapsing soon. And so,
yeah, but I guess my thought is like, can we get a timeline on some dollars that are kind of, urgent, so we'll know if there are any other revenue streams from the grants that we could actually program.
Yes, ma'am. We have all those numbers. We know what's coming and what's going to be lapsing and what that timeline is. And so we'll be having recurring and regular conversations with all of our subrecipients to say, okay, how are you going to spend your funds? If you're not going to be able to, then let's have a conversation about how to rescind them or reallocate them.
Which may not be necessarily reallocated or rescinded to the city of Asheville. They have that option to decide on how they want to utilize their funding.
But if they can't,
yes, we could.
But if they can obligate it or program it in the time that the grant expects them to, then as a partner, can we talk about an additional plan for this upcoming year?
Absolutely.
That's exactly, I think, one of the things I appreciated about the county's conversation is what we all have been hoping and working towards, especially as transit advocates in the community for a long time, is that the county and the city would work together as funding partners to better deliver transit service for the people who live and work in Asheville and Buncombe County. So this is ultimately a very positive thing. And I think it's a conversation we've been having at the MPO, and we can have a deeper conversation. Can we confirm that the planned staff meeting where it was going to be like city and transit staff after the budget is on the calendar finally? I thought there was going to be a bigger.
We had a meeting.
Okay, that was
the meeting last Thursday that we had that had gotten postponed a couple times. That was finally had last week.
Okay, well, thank you for following up and for these updates.
I was not totally tracking the questions that Councilwoman Smith was asking Jessica and the answers. And was that kind of a different conversation than about this money, or somebody help me understand? That was, okay, so it's not, so.
Future Mayor, if we know of any additional potential rescission decisions by the other municipalities because they can't spend their resources in a timely manner. I think that was Councilmember Smith's question.
That might impact this year's budget.
Oh, that was my intention of trying to figure out their grant tracking to impact this year's budget, because we see the example right now that after the fact of us making our budget decision or approving our budget, then these new dollars appear. But it seems like if there is grant tracking, then we'll know when those grants are threatened by timeliness, and we could actually partner to see if those dollars can be rescinded and used now for transit programming.
Do we, Jessica, do we know, but not for, do we know what the potential, somebody give me an idea here. Like, is there potentially $500,000 out there that these other communities might also rescind to us that would impact this year's budget? Is that
what are those deadlines? If we understand the deadlines, then we can understand whether it can be rescinded to us or not.
So the only entity that has funds that are unprogrammed and that are lapsing is Buncombe County, and it's this one. It's actually just $1.1 million, but they're offering to throw in another couple $100,000 from a different grant program to total 1.37. They're the only ones that have funds that are threatened to lapse that would impact this next FY25. So every year we might see a similar situation. However, we have to have those individual conversations with each subrecipient. So yes, Buncombe County could have funds that could lapse for FY26, and we'll repeat those conversations, but we do have to be careful that we don't become reliant on them, because they aren't ours. And so they're doing this, as a in goodwill, but it is not, at this point in time, there is no intention of it being a repeated recension to us.
Was it restricted though? Because in my talks with them, it sounded like they, yes, want us to do the Leicester, the Enca, the South Asheville, but it wasn't necessarily restricting this 1.1 million. They were saying, this is one time, we have these goals. If you could do them, please do. Right. So this is, we could take the lump sum and put it into offsetting the general fund. I know I understand some of us would like to extend the routes and do those repairs and things, but just to be clear, it is not a requirement of the rescission.
No, it has not been communicated to us, at least on the staff level, that there's any strings attached or this has to be used for very specific purposes. It could be used to offset general fund contribution. It could be used to help us buy a bus. It's adding to our bottom line, and there's different opportunities that we could choose, or the council could choose to use those funds for.
In my talks ahead of their meeting, that was the discussion we had, which was they understood that we were going into our general fund to support our transit. They understood that it needs to be more self-sustaining. They understood that we had longer term needs, but this was a one-time thing, and they were choosing not to restrict it for that reason. That's how I understood it approached.
Yes, I mean, I think that they understand that doing service expansions generally should not be done with one-time funds. I will just say, transit systems are never self-sustaining. Our general fund contribution has always been pretty significant, and I think will continue to be. Ultimately, we need new funding sources for transit, or additional funding sources. And this is helpful for us for 1 year, but it is not something that we should guarantee or hang our hat on.
So then I guess the question to council is, do we want to reopen up our budget with this new money, understanding it's coming in, and cancel our tax increase? That's what I'm proposing. And I'm doing so at this agenda briefing rather than Tuesday night, where it's just really the last possible minute to discuss it.
Rachel,
I just want to quickly note that the county vote will not happen until July. And I know we've got John on here and Tony as well. But Chapter 159-15 actually states that if after July 1, the local government receives revenues that are substantially more or less than the amount anticipated, the governing body may, before January 1st, following adoption of the budget, amend the budget ordinance to reduce or increase the property tax levy. So just wanted to note that it says if after July 1, which we would receive this revenue after July 1. And also just want to note that there, I believe, are some conversations happening between county staff and the county commission regarding if there will be any additional specific conditions on their request associated with the rescission. So we have heard some feedback from county staff that there may be a request to tie this rescission to a commitment to expand service on either S3 or S6.
For future ones, not this year, right?
I'm hearing that it may be a condition of the vote that occurs in July.
I was just going to add to
Tell Finance Director, please.
Yes, I was just going to add to what Rachel said. I think she covered it perfectly. But if you all were going to vote to amend the budget and change the tax rate, it would have to happen after July 1st. So it couldn't happen at your meeting next week. It would have to be done at the meeting in July.
I mean, can I get a little understanding on why that is, other than the statute that was just read? Because we make our budget based on future revenues all the time that haven't been assigned to us yet.
Yeah, it's very much the statute. The statute doesn't give us the ability to amend the budget until after July 1st. So that's
because we have adopted it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So simply the adoption and voting means that we have to wait until July to amend it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and we confirmed that. We talked to staff at School of Government yesterday and confirmed that. So
that's helpful to know. Do you all think that it sounds like you might actually know a little more information by the end of we only have one meeting in July. At the end of July, you might know some more information. The county will have voted, number one, so we'll have that check box. And you'll know some more information about how much is actually available to help offset the general fund is what I'm hearing you all. You can't totally tell us today the exact number yet, but you probably will be able to say mid-July after the county votes, at least. When does the county vote? July what?
July 16th.
Okay, so after they vote, this will gel up and you'll be able to tell us how much we got to work with. Okay, so council, it sounds like
One thing, Esther, we should make sure staff know. So when the bid was getting down to the details, we learned that there was going to be a timeline schedule issue with the county deploying the tax bills or something that needed to be done by a certain deadline. So if we are moving us to July,
does that find that out?
Yeah.
But I mean, the statute lets you, it's a good point. I mean, the statute lets you change the tax rate up till whenever it is, January, but in practical purposes, the county's sending out those tax bills in August. So that you're right. Good question. If staff could check with them on kind of the drop dead date there for the tax rate, that would be helpful.
I think it's going to be tight, if not already too late, based on the bid conversation, but that's helpful. Okay, so we don't need to decide this today or Tuesday. We have to decide it in July. But I appreciate everybody hearing that idea out, and I appreciate the consideration.
Anything else? Anybody before we? Kim's already jumped off to the MPO meeting, which I've got to do too. But any other issues, questions, comments? No. Okay. Everybody have a good day. Thank you.
Mayor, can I catch you for 2 minutes?
Oh yeah. I'm sorry, Maggie. You said that's right.